What a mess.
Absolutely.
Can't be easy for the royal family to see all of this going on and, not being able to comment and put your own...
Never complain, never explain.
Well, exactly. Now, we want to return to what happened last week in the Irish capital. Last Thursday it was, when riots broke out. The Irish government are under fire with politicians' complacency about violent anti-immigrant groups accused for the outbreak.
But the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, has asked people to avoid connecting crime with migration, saying it's not right. And there's also this secondary issue of new hate speech laws that are being brought in Ireland, seemingly in response.
Yes, so let's speak to talk show host and broadcaster Niall Boylan to give us the very latest. Niall, let's start with that hate speech legislation. I know you're very concerned about what happened in Dublin, the riots that took place after that horrific stabbing of children. You're concerned that the government may be using this to push through even tougher hate speech legislation, essentially censorship.
This hate speech legislation has been around for the last 2 years, but came into the news more so at the start of this year. And initially it would seem to surround the idea that people were making defamatory comments about members of the transgender community. That's what it seems to be very much focused on, the LGBT plus community, going back about 8 months ago. So many people objected to the legislation. Even in the public submissions, over 3/4 of the people who put in a public submission said the legislation was unnecessary, because you have to remember, we already have incitement to hatred laws from 1989. Updating those laws would have been no harm, of course, to include social media, but they've added this element of hate speech. Now, the minister will not and refuses to define the word hate. And she was asked numerous questions in interviews about, would J.K. Rowling, for example, come under this legislation? And she went, no, that'll be okay. Would this come under the legislation? Oh, well, maybe that would. So in other words, nobody actually knows what she means by the word hate. So people have huge concerns now that if you even voice an opinion on something or something you doesn't like, in other words, this is very subjective and open to the interpretation of a person, you could find yourself in trouble. And the most concerning part of the legislation is if a member of An Garda Síochána, our police force, suspect you might be in possession of hateful material, i.e. somebody has sent you a silly meme that might, by some people's definition, be racist or homophobic, and they can get a court order that morning in a district court, not a high court, district court, just like that, go into your house, take your devices, and if you're in possession of it, you can be charged, fined, and go to jail. And not only that, so can your employer, depending if you did it on work time. I mean, this is the most Orwellian piece of legislation anybody has ever seen. We're being laughed at around the world. Elon Musk has quoted as saying that Leo Varadkar hates the Irish people. I mean, Elon Musk also said about this piece of legislation going back months ago that it was restrictive, it was authoritarian. I mean, this piece of legislation is absolutely nuts. Nobody agrees with it, but it's come off the back. And I suppose we really have to fill you in on the whole background of what's happened here in the last 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, going back 4 weeks ago, we had 2 very high-profile murder cases here in Ireland. One, Aisling Murphy, a young school teacher, who was stabbed to death by Joseph Pushka, who was found guilty and given life in prison. Aidan Moffat and Michael Snee were stabbed to death and decapitated by Joseph Pellini, who also got a full life sentence. And these are only in the last few weeks. And then the tragedy, of course, of the young girl who is now still in critical condition in hospital. Thankfully, the other 2 children have been released from hospital. The school teacher is still in hospital in a serious condition. And the riots that happened or ensued afterwards, what the government are doing is associating the riots with anybody who disagrees with immigration or immigration policy, which is not the case at all, because those rioters, they don't have any political motive. They're just gombeans. They're just Egypts who just went out, decided to cause trouble and took an opportunity to loot shops, to set fire to buildings. Normal people who are on the right of centre wouldn't do things like that. So the government is now deflecting away from the actual immigration debate by saying, let's push through with this legislation you all hate anyway. And not only that, they want to bring in other legislation before Christmas that will make it legal for the Garda Síochána and, I suppose, on the streets as well, to use facial recognition cameras, which the Irish Council of Civil Liberties said goes against our human rights and our privacy. And there's issues around that, and also that they're actually inaccurate. So it's a huge political football where you've got Sinn Féin, the opposing party in government, mind you, not doing a great job, probably the worst opposing party in the history of the Irish state, because they seem to go along with everything the government says, but they're now demanding the resignation of the Justice Minister. They're demanding the resignation of the Chief of Police because they believe it was so badly organised last week, and all they're doing is blaming social media on everything.
Gosh, well, Niall Boylan, thank you for running us through that at great speed. It's such a complicated scenario, of course. No doubt the government of Ireland would argue that limiting what they see as hate speech would prevent more riots like this. But as you say, that is deeply contested as to whether it was speech at all that really did start these thugs deciding to burn things in the capital of Ireland. I'm afraid we've run out of time there, but Niall Boylan, talk show host and broadcaster in the Republic, thank you very much